we were just arranging some streaming on the second floor because, as you can see, we have a packed house and there are more colleagues upstairs, so we were working on some technology. So thank you. My name is Israel Fernando Herrera. I am the conference chair. And on behalf of the IFLTA board, I welcome you to our special conference. As many of you might know, we celebrate 50 years of existence as an organization. 50 years of success. We have prepared numerous events for each day of the conference. We started last Thursday. We had the pre-service beginning workshop for teachers, and that was led by renowned teachers by 2014 ACTFL National Language Teacher of the Year, Linda Eckness, and also our own Indiana teacher, Jill Warner, who was 2012 ACTFL National Language Teacher of the Year finalist. And also AATF Indiana President Marcel Espar. They were in charge of the pre-service, and we kicked off yesterday our conference. So thank you. And today is a special day because we have the visit of a renowned person that you all have read, that you all have heard of. We have, I have the great honor to introduce one of the most important figures in the fields of second language acquisition and bilingual education, Dr. Steve Krashen. I was very glad that he accepted this special invitation because you might know that he is very busy. He has a very busy international and national agenda, but he accepted our invitation. So let's just welcome Dr. Krashen.
I have to explain the numbers on the board. You know what it is, right? Pi to 20 places. I just wrote that up there basically to show off, but also to see if the board worked and I could read it from the end. In high school we all memorized pi to 20 places, just for fun, okay? We had nothing better to do. If you can do 20 places and get it witnessed, you could be on a website. This is good for your street cred. And I tell people when they ask for my code, my number and all that, I tell them it's the last 4 digits of pi. A little nerd joke, okay? Speaking of jokes, when I started speaking, I realized you have to start out with a joke, which I will. Relatively clean joke. And it has to show that you have a sense of humor, and in this case, it has to show that you speak a few languages, again, to get street cred. For years, the rumor went around that I was monolingual. That's once I've started showing off wherever I can. Okay. It's a good idea. Anyway, here's the joke. Our research, we have made an important discovery. We have discovered the most important sentence that you should learn first in another language. The very first sentence you should know. Mi amigo va pagar. Mon ami va payer. Mein Freund wird bezahlen. Ano, wait, etc., etc., etc. So I know those in a bunch of languages. Anyway, today we're going to talk about polyglots, and I'm going to give you the most important anecdote first, and then I'll get into theory, etc. I'm going to talk about one of the people I'm going to talk about is a woman named Lom Kato. No, Mr. Trump, I'm not here. My goodness, it's like ever going to leave me alone. Anyway, yeah, maybe you should. Don't you know who I am? Okay. That's another joke. I have to tell it. This is an airline joke. All the people are lined up, to get their tickets, and there's one guy at the end who's very irate. And he's not getting his ticket, there are too many people. He storms to the front of the line and says, I want to get on this plane, I want to get out now. Don't you know who I am? And the agent gets on the loudspeaker and says, we have a man here who doesn't know who he is. You wait your whole life for that. Anyway, one of the people I'm going to talk about is Lom Kato. I'm going to tell you about her experiences in language. I met her, 23, 24 years ago in Hungary. I was giving a short course in Page, a city about 2 hours from Budapest. This person, she's a fabulous polyglot. She speaks 17 languages, etc. And I met with her. I will tell you about the adventures a little later. But I met with her 3 times in Hungary, and I went to Budapest just to be with her. The 3rd time, my wife and daughter were there. We had a wonderful time. She really does speak 17 languages. At the time, she was 86 years old, okay? Our last moments together, which changed my life. I think about her every day. She took my hand. Now, this is a woman, 86, who spoke at the time 17 languages. She took my hand and she said, Stephen, you're so young. I was 54. So many years left, so many languages to acquire. Isn't that beautiful? It has stuck with me. I've been working on, since that day, I've been working on other languages every single day, at least a little bit. That has changed my life. Anyway, I'm going to begin, if you have the handout, you see that I'm going to begin with talking about theory. We're going to talk about case histories, and a little note about case histories. Case histories are really exciting for me. They're not anecdotes, they're data. The point with case histories, though, if you want to do research or read research, you got to look at a lot of them. If you just look at one, you don't know what factors are significant. You have someone in your family who says, well, all this stuff about what you do in class, my cousin memorized the dictionary and he speaks Romanian fluently now, or something. You have always like this. But if you look at other things he did and you compare it to other people, you come to some different conclusions. So that's what we're going to do, and we're going to see that there are some factors that everybody does. Of course, it's going to be comprehensible input. You know the story. Okay. This is a dangerous game, though. If we find one real counterexample, it's over. My whole career is ruined. So that's how science works. You can get lots of confirming evidence, but you still wait for that one counterexample, and then it's finished. Then I can retire. Okay. Let me summarize for you briefly the last 40 years of my life. I call this the 40 Years' War. The 40 Years' War has been between 2 ideas, 2 hypotheses. One is the comprehension hypothesis, and I'll write this large enough so the first 2 rows can see it. The comprehension hypothesis, I didn't turn it on, you're right. I went to the bathroom and I wanted to make sure. See the movie, Police Story? I kept it on in the bathroom. Okay, here we are. Mr. Spock, come to the bridge if this works. Okay. The comprehension hypothesis says, as you've probably read about, the way we acquire language is by understanding input. We get comprehensible input. Important point. In order to acquire language, first you get comprehensible input. That's how it starts. You listen to stories, you have a nice conversation, you read a book. The result are all the skills, vocabulary, grammar. This is the cause. This is the result. The rival hypothesis, which we call the skill building hypothesis, reverses the causation. It says you start with vocabulary. You start with grammar. Remember the foreign language class you took in school, right? When you first started out. First you learn grammar, vocabulary. Then you practice them over and over again in output. And you get your errors corrected. And if you keep doing this, someday you can actually use the language. In other words, skill building is a delayed gratification hypothesis. Suffer now, enjoy it later. Comprehensible input says, enjoy yourself now. So the comprehensible input idea is much more pleasant. It's much easier. In fact, my observation, which there is research correlating it, and it's on the handout, says that most students, I would say 95% of students in skill building classes don't like it. The ones who like it become language teachers. You see the problem. So comprehension is more fun, more interesting. If it's not interesting, it won't work. You got to pay attention to the input, to pay attention. It has to be reasonably interesting, etc., which I think we've discovered pretty well in the profession. So comprehension is win-win. It's more interesting, and according to the research, which is the last 45 years of my life, 50 years, it works, it works, it works. I devoted most of my waking hours to doing the research, reading the research. By the way, my goals today, I have several goals. One is to make your life easier, a little more pleasant. The second is to save you money. Take a look at the top of the handout where it says www.sdkrashen.com. That is my website. Hundreds of papers and books, hold your applause, for free. Now you may applaud. I have declared war against the publishers. I got this from a guy named Tim Gowers. You've all heard of him. He's the winner of the major award in mathematics. You all study algebraic geometry, right?
Totally.
He's British. He's really cool. My daughter-in-law's an algebraic geometrist. She knows all about Tim Gowers. My son is just algebra, but they still get along. Anyway, Tim Gowers decided to rebel against the publishers of the math journals. And he wrote this big petition. And he says, I'm through with you. And so is everyone. We're not subscribing to the journals anymore. We're not contributing articles. We're not editing them. We're not even reading them. Because you guys make all the money. We do all the work. In the old days, we could all afford it. Because the reason is reasonable. Okay. Today, it's so expensive, I do okay. I'll tell you the secret, in fact, money. I might as well do that now. Just in case you're curious. We do okay, I'm pretty comfortable. And I used a magic method, and I'm surprised other people don't do it. I have the key to financial well-being, and it's one word. And you will never forget it. Are you ready? Inheritance.
That's good.
Mommy and Daddy were really nice. It's all gone, but boy, it was wonderful. Anyway, even with my position, we're okay. I can't afford the journals. Nobody can. Books come out, they cost like $200 for edit. I can't afford it, okay? Nobody can. So we're declaring war. I'm one of a small group. Everything now for me is in what's called open access free journals, and I put it on the website. You can go to that website and download any article you want, several of my books. I'm not publishing any new books, they're too expensive. Nobody can buy them. It's obsolete, the whole idea, and it's all open access journals. The publishers have been ripping us off for too many years.
Amen.
It's got to start somewhere. I'll tell you where I got the idea. From the Grateful Dead. Yeah. Isn't it true? Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. The Grateful Dead in the days when people were pirating. I'm rambling on and on, so I'm canceling the next two talks. Anyway, the Grateful Dead were touring at the time when people were concerned about piracy. You know, recording the songs, and you know, the artists weren't making any money. So they decided to turn it around. They would start their concerts by saying, take out your recorders. If you want to record us, go ahead, okay? You want to share it with your friends, fine. They decided they were not going to make money on recording, they were going to make money on touring, which I think is a very rational. I haven't decided where I'm going to make up the income, but still, this is not the way to do it through these books and papers. So you can find this stuff there. So we've reversed the causality here. Comprehension is win-win. Skill building is lose-lose. The problem, too, is that the skill building hypothesis puts grammar at the core. Now, I love grammar. I have a PhD in grammar. Like many of you, I love Chomsky's work. I like diagrammatic sentences. The whole thing is thrilling to me. But it's not the way language is acquired. It took me a long time to recover from this, okay? We say, I am not opposed to grammar. I've never said grammar is evil. Grammar is wrong. Teach grammar, go to jail. Never. It's limited. It's hard to learn, hard to remember, hard to think about, hard to apply. These are the conditions on monitor use that are very difficult to apply. Sometimes it's help, it's good here and there, etc., but it's not the core of what we do. Okay, another point I'd like to make. We not only think input has to be interesting, my latest conjecture, I love the word conjecture. I got this from my son, the mathematician. He says, if you have a hypothesis and you're not really too confident, call it a conjecture. Because then if you're wrong, you can say, well, it's just a conjecture. Anyway, I think this one's right though. I call this the compelling comprehensible input conjecture. Input shouldn't just be interesting, it should be compelling. This is an idea from Csikszentmihalyi, no, I won't spell it for you, who wrote a book called Flow, F-L-O-W, which is sensational. He says the time we really learn is when we're so involved in what we're doing, we forget everything but the activity. You forget who you are, your sense of self is diminished, your sense of time is diminished. I got this idea from a paper written by a former student of mine. I rewrote it and became co-authored, which is how I do research. Anyway, Christy Lau, who lives in San Francisco, and it's about her son, Vincent. I have him as Paul in the research. His real name is Vincent. He's a really nice guy. He's in college now. When he grew up with his family in San Francisco, bilingual in Cantonese and Mandarin. Mom and dad are from the Hong Kong area. When he was a little boy, mom and dad were working real hard. My former student, Christy, was a junior professor. Husband was working in the Silicon Valley. And occasionally they had to hire a babysitter. The babysitter would come over, turn on the television to Mandarin cartoons. Now, you know this, but the public doesn't. Cantonese and Mandarin are different languages. They're not dialects of Chinese. They're different languages. They have some shared vocabulary. They're related, no question. But if you know one, you don't know the other. It helps a little, kind of like Romanian and French. You know, there's some shared vocabulary, but it doesn't automatically make you a speaker of the other. So, but the cartoons, he started to understand. He had the caretaker, the babysitter to help out. The shared vocabulary definitely helped. And the brilliant cartoons, children's television, is so interesting for cartoons. SpongeBob. I love SpongeBob. I have a hard time with Mr. Crab, though. You know, Mr. Crab owns the Krabby Patty, right? The Krusty Krab. And they serve crab sandwiches, and he's a crab. That's not right. Anyway, did you see the last Avengers movie? When Iron Man referred to one of the invaders as Squidward? That was a really good crossover. Anyway, children's TV is absolutely wonderful. So he started to understand the programs again and again. Gradually, he understood more. He started watching children's TV in Mandarin, kept watching children's TV through elementary school. In high school, Dad would bring home 2 movies in Mandarin every weekend. The family would watch the news every night in Mandarin. Today, Vincent speaks Mandarin. The important point is, oh, they go to China, they're fine. You know, Beijing, where Mandarin spoken, Taiwan, it's fine. The important point, though, is that Vincent doesn't care about Mandarin one way or the other. He never thought, I'm going to acquire Mandarin because I'm Chinese background and it's the language that binds us together. That's what Hanban, the Chinese cultural agency, says. He didn't care. But he's fine, it's okay. You know, company comes over, speaks Mandarin, he's fine, he's happy to do it, etc. He never tried to acquire Mandarin, he was never motivated. He was interested in the programs. It was the story that counts. This has caused me to change my feelings about motivation. Doesn't matter. You've all gone through this. You tell your kids in middle school Spanish, you really should pay attention in Spanish class. It's going to help you someday.
Yeah.
You know that doesn't matter. Tell them a good story, they're with you. They'll acquire whether they want to or not. So the compelling thing is the major thing. Okay, let's talk about Lomkato a little bit and Steve Kaufman, who are my two examples. These are people who don't know each other, but I have met both of them. Steve speaks 16 languages. Oh gosh, get this. He acquired 8 of them since age 62. He's now 70. Steve Kaufman, both these people are the real thing. I have seen them in action. Steve and I have gone out to Spanish-speaking Mexican restaurants, okay? When I was at ACTFL a couple of years ago, Steve and I went out with my Mandarin teacher. We had a good time, and we talked with all the teachers. They thought he was amazing, okay? So I've seen him in action. He is absolutely the real thing. So I've looked at what they've said, what they've talked about in their books, written before they ever heard of me and my ideas. And you'll see that this all converges. Very interesting. Both of them did a lot of it on their own. Lomkato grew up in Budapest, which is not a multilingual city. It's Hungarian. When I was there, was a little bit of a German substrata, but not very much. And now it's English, but still it is Romanian. You want to go to the bathroom, you better know what the signs say in Romanian. I'm sorry, in Hungarian. Steve grew up in Montreal, but in English-speaking Montreal. He had French in school and hated it. He then went off to France for a couple of years, and he has spent time in Japan. But the other languages largely on his own. So this is an inspiration. These are people who started later in life and did it themselves, and they're the best. I went to a polyglot conference a year and a half ago. Steve got me an invitation, and Steve was one of the speakers. It was wonderful. I felt like the village idiot, okay, because there are all these people there who are all extremely pleasant. You've got to be if you want to acquire languages. Otherwise, people aren't going to talk to you. They're very nice, outgoing people, very friendly, very proud of each other, showing off. Look, listen to him speak, Hungarian, all this. And they all, Steve asked at the beginning of his talk, how many of you grew up multilingual? These are people who speak 8, 10 languages. How many of you grew up monolingual? Maybe 25%. Most of them grew up monolingual and did it later in life. This is so inspiring. Well, they talk about, the first thing I want to talk about is their point of view about immersion. People say you should go to the country, right? Well, first of all, if you're going to go to the country, you better be an intermediate already, as you know. Second of all, even so, it's not that easy. I have these lots of juicy quotes for you on the handout. Here's Lomkato. When you're abroad, it's kind of difficult to find someone who's going to be interesting to talk to. Someone patient, intelligent, available enough to help you, etc. You're better off sometimes staying home and creating the environment yourself, which turns out to be quite an interesting suggestion. When you do go, what she does, she goes on guided tours, maybe the same topic with different guides, etc. Goes to the movies. In those days it was radio. Listen to the radio first in a language you know, and then when you don't, etc. But Steve says, create your own language world. This has turned out to be very good advice for me, let me tell you. Okay, second, compelling, comprehensible input. They both understand this. Steve says he took all these classes, but the best part in his Mandarin class was hanging out with the instructors and listening to the gossip and the conversation. He said that's where it really happened. With Lomkato, it was finding compelling reading material. She did most of it on reading. She didn't have people to talk to. So she would always buy 2 books because she knew she wouldn't like one. And always buy books that are at least 10, 15 years old because they're more comprehensible. I found that to be the case, especially as I get older. And she talks about becoming absorbed and being in flow. One of my favorite quotes. A character's fate becomes the reader's fate. Genuine readers sail with Robinson Crusoe, throw themselves under the train with Anna Karenina, die of tuberculosis with the Lady of Camins. Afterwards, luckily, they come back to life. It's acquisition that counts, not learning. They both know this. Steve is so upfront about this. He talks about struggling with grammar. He says, and this is Steve Kaufman, like 17 languages. The guy is really good. He says, occasionally I'd consult grammar books. Sometimes it helped, sometimes it didn't. I would remember the grammar explanations only for a short period of time and then forget them. I'm going to anticipate another point. My Spanish, in case you're interested, is like language number 4 or 5. I'm okay, but I'm kind of intermediate. It's good to be, for me, part of my research is being at different levels with different languages. It really helps. I'm pretty good at German, that's my best one. And then French. I had a French conversation at the airport. I found a little boy in a Batman costume speaking French to his parents. I said in French, "Are you Batman? It's a pleasure to meet you." You know, it was a great conversation. Anyway, after that is Spanish, and it's good to be intermediate because I will freely confess to you, not only am I hopeless with the subjunctive, but I have not mastered ser and estar. Not even close. I have looked at that rule 500 times. I have a PhD in grammar. I forget it 5 minutes afterwards. Does that make you feel better?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I'm going to again anticipate another point. I was in Mexico 3 months ago in Cuernavaca, a week-long seminar in the Phoenix School, right? Was a guest there years ago. And I stayed with the owners of the school. We'd have dinner every night. It was me at the table and 6 Spanish teachers. And we all spoke Spanish at the table. It was a lot of fun. And I thought of what Steve has talked about. And I decided not to worry about ser and estar. Otherwise, I'd be tongue-tied. Because it comes up in every sentence. Right? You can't go anywhere without it. He makes the point, people don't care. People are not listening to your mistakes. And that opened it up. We had wonderful conversations. I used them absolutely at random. Spanish teachers, they were there, they couldn't care less. We had wonderful conversations. So Steve Kaufman is my language therapist. It's been a great help. So if you're intermediate, don't worry about it, okay? Here we go. Here's what Steve says. I deliberately ignored explanations of the theory of Chinese grammar that made no sense to me. Instead, I knew that with enough exposure, they'd start to seem natural. Isn't that powerful? Keep listening, keep reading, and it'll start to feel good. It'll start to come out. Well, Steve also told me this personally. He says, you know, you ever been at this point where you're having a conversation in a language you're not really good at, and there's a word that you kind of know it and you want to use it, but it's not quite there, right? Oh my gosh, this happens to me with Mandarin, which is my weakest language right now. And here's what he said. He said, don't worry about it. Keep listening. Keep reading. Trust the process. It will come. That has been the most useful advice I have ever had. So thank you, language therapist. Sentence structures that were strange and difficult eventually felt natural if I encountered them often enough in my reading and listening. Do not spend your time in a vain attempt to master the language from grammar rules and word lists. You will not enjoy this tedious form of study, and it will not work. True or not true? Okay, Moncato, of course, says exactly the same thing. Oh, I'm okay. Got another 2 hours. What lets you avoid mistakes is not laws of grammar, but the right form, seen, heard, and said that when I disagree with. To such an extent, it becomes second nature. Perusing books frequently, listening to the radio in those days diligently, you encounter the right form again and again. Once again, beautiful. If our interest gets our heart and mind to accept these patterns, we can recall them quickly when we need them. I asked Moncato when I was with her, do you believe in teaching grammar? She said, for adults, optional. But yeah, nothing wrong with it. And focus on the simple forms, first person of verbs, present tense, etc. How about teaching grammar to children? The world's #1 polyglot at the time, Moncato, the true living master, said, the idea of teaching grammar to children is absurd. Who are you gonna believe? Someone writing a textbook? who has never spent a day alone in a room with 10-year-old kids? Who are true living masters who've seen it and done it again and again. Okay, correction. Lom Kato tells this great story. She got her PhD in chemistry. And after that, when she was like 25, she decided to do languages. She first did French and gave French lessons, staying lessons ahead of her kids, and then English, etc. But her major was chemistry. And she knows chemistry, and she took jobs. Her life was translating and interpreting. She took a job as an interpreter at a chemistry conference, something she knows very well. Translating from another language into English. She made a slip of the tongue. Instead of saying inorganic, she said unorganic. She said, my chief rival haughtily corrected me. She then said, I was lost for the rest of the day. If this happens to Lom Kato, the best in the world, who knows 99.99% of English and knows chemistry very well, if this is so devastating, what about our 10-year-old kids? Error correction, she said, made me sick to my stomach. Besides, it doesn't work, as what the research keeps saying again and again. You get a little bit of a hump from it, and then it fades away. Okay. Oh, that made you pause, okay. But then she says, back and forth, uncorrected mistakes are very perilous. If you keep making the same mistake, it'll become ingrained. No, it doesn't. At one point, I disagree. If you keep looking at what happens to people, they eventually acquire it if they get more input, especially if they read. Do you have to know every word when you read? No. And you don't have to look up every word. I heard Steve say this at a lecture. He says, when I look up a word, by the time I get back to the text, I've forgotten the word. You too? Oh my goodness. I still have a little dictionary, I can't help it, but only when I get really curious, okay? Important point, don't be a perfectionist. He said, I got much better when I started giving up the idea of perfection. Try to force yourself from perfection, which is vanity and will hinder your progress. Enjoy yourself. Big sentence here I have underlined. And this is what happened when I had dinner with my friends in Mexico. Do not think your grammar and pronunciation are being judged. Let me say that again. Don't think you're being judged. You're not in class. Most people, I know this is hard to understand, don't care. Most people want to know what you're saying. This is an amazing statement for we grammar teachers, for us grammar teachers. Oh gosh, mistake. Okay. I'm about to criticize Donald Trump. Wait. If you feel you must speak like a native, you will be inhibited. Language is the only thing worth knowing even poorly. Propagation of half-truths is not an advancement of science, but a hindrance. This is Donald Trump. He's appointed people to his cabinet and his advisors in science who have very little idea, who have a lot of half-truths about science, which could destroy the world in terms of ecology. This is no joke. This is very serious. But for the language learner, it's a pity to fall silent because you don't know with certainty whether a form will hit home or not. Is that helpful or what? Okay, so make a mistake, don't worry about it. When I was in Hungary, I tried to milk my relationship with Lom Kato and take full advantage of it. I was there for about 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks, and by the way, I did improve in Hungarian. It was really good. I taught a class, and my students, as homework, we would meet for coffee, groups of 3 or 4. I paid for the coffee. And the homework assignment, which we did together, was for them to create lessons for me in Hungarian. And I got to the point where I could say a few things, etc. Anyway, I would meet with the local scholars. I was invited to give lectures in Budapest and departments of linguistics and schools of education. And everywhere I went, I gave about 4 lectures, I think. I bragged about my relationship with Lom Kato. I said, oh yeah, I've been hanging out with Lom Kato. They all knew who she was. None of them had read her books. None of them, all these great linguists and pedagogues, none of them knew about her. They all said, oh, she's different. She has a different brain. what, 3 left hemispheres? What is that? No idea. All these polyglots that I met, the ones in Canada that I met in Montreal, all said the same thing. Very open, very interesting to talk to. Said we're no different. We simply know how to do it, and we're patient. That's the big difference. Steve says it a different way. The successful foreign language speakers take for granted they'll have to communicate in another language. They take it for granted. They don't think it's unusual. It's natural to them. Accept the fact that you were born with the ability to learn to speak a new language. Pretty heavy stuff, right? They all do that. They all accept it. They know it's going to be an uneven, non-linear path, and they don't get upset. They just keep getting more input. Well, last point is the idea of language parent. I got this from a buddy of mine, a New Zealander named Chris Lonsdale, wrote a book called The Third Ear. Chris is very good. He's a native speaker of English. He speaks Mandarin and Cantonese quite well. And he has this point. He says, it's very good to get what he calls a language parent, a friend. Someone who's not interested in acquiring your language, who wants to be your pal and just wants a nice relationship, and will speak a little slower. The languages I've been especially successful with, I've had language parents, and so have you. My German comes from a year in Vienna, 1962. Oh my gosh. I'm older than Santa Claus. Bad joke coming up. I told my grandson, I said, you know, when I was a little boy, we lived in the country. He said, Grandpa, when you were a little boy, everybody lived in the country. Anyway, I would say I had a language parent in Vienna. It was my landlady, my housefrau, Frau Novak. She was wonderful. I thought she was like so old. She was 62. And what she liked to do, she's very talkative, which was great. And she repeated herself a lot, which really helps. She liked to tell stories. We had tea 2-3 times a week, and I really enjoyed relaxing and chatting with her. She just liked to talk. It was great. She was my language parent. In French, which comes from a semester sabbatical largely in Ottawa, where I worked with the university. There's a guy in the French department, Hubert, who is, you know, French language, is a vivre Quebec libre, all this stuff. And his English was fine, but he never spoke English. And his kids, he would never allow his kids to speak English. We used to get together every weekend. And my kids and his kids, same age, go roller skating and haul across the river and all that. And he was my language parent. He always spoke to me as a teacher, comfortably, slowly, easily, and we had a terrific relationship. I've lost my language parent in Spanish. I don't know what happened to her. For a long time, I just gave up my membership, but I was a member of Gold's Gym, you can tell, right? Today's my off day, so I don't have any muscles. I was a member of Gold's Gym for years and years and years. Now I'm just a member of the local gym. I can't afford it anymore. Oh gosh, prices have gone up so much. Anyway, one of the people working there in the cleanup crew was Emma. Emma and I, after a while, became great friends. We had something in common. My grandkids, her kids. Every time I'd work out, we'd chat for 5-10 minutes, just like 2-3 days a week, and we would talk about our children. I found out eventually she did not speak any English at all. I didn't know that for about a year. We had this long, and she would say at the end, this is so sad, thanks for talking to me. The people who work there, they don't pay any attention, you know? So that was wonderful, a warm, very nice relationship. I got to hunt her down. She was so nice. Anyway, get someone who will talk to you. Steve had someone like that in Japan. I don't know if Loncato did, but those of us who've had them, we know how important this is. And from them, you get to know other people. Here's my conclusions. My conclusions are at the chart on the bottom of the page. And this is how I think a good way of doing research with case histories. I have other case histories here that belong to another paper, so you can look this up, the polyglot paper, which is on the website, etc., and other papers, and my papers on case histories, which are also on the website. What these people have in common in every case I've looked at, in successful case histories, they've all gotten comprehensible input, every single one. Those of you coming to my bilingual talk, I'll be talking about how Arnold Schwarzenegger acquired English versus what he said about it. Important footnote, Arnold is a very nice guy. All of us who worked out in Venice Beach when Arnold was there will attest to that. And a gold gym, very friendly. You're doing your curls, he comes over and says, try it like this, can I spot you? He's very friendly to everybody. Anyway, with women, I don't know, I didn't witness that, but it's guy to guy, he was really, really good. But, oh gosh, he had no idea about language and caused a lot of harm. But he had comprehensible input in English all over the place, I'll be explaining that. Some of these people got corrected, others didn't. Some of them studied grammar, had grammar background, some of them didn't. Some of them tried to talk before they were ready. That's the topic of my talk tomorrow, called Down with Forced Speech. Okay? Some of them didn't. They had in common comprehensible input. I regard this not as proof, because that's not how science works, but as interesting, supportive evidence, which gives us more evidence for the theory and some really good advice on how to acquire languages. Thank you for your patience. See some of you.
So thank you very much, Dr. Krashen. So this is the first opportunity that we have to hear Dr.